Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number 3029-5-652. This is a very common double-acting spring hinge. The Bommer 3029 is really, synonymous with the concept of double-acting spring hinges, and you'll see these kinds of hinges everywhere. Doors that separate in a restaurant the kitchen from the dining area, very typical application. I've seen these installed in residential applications. The entertainment restaurant industry is extremely common for these, where you're going to see them installed. Residential applications, again, like I said. But any application where you've got a requirement for double acting, this is the go-to hinge. This is the industry standard. Now, the -5 means that it is what is called a 5-inch hinge, but more importantly than calling it a 5-inch hinge is the reference that 5-inch is directly related to the thickness of door that the hinge is made to work with, and that thickness is 1 1/8 through 1.5 thick doors. So if you've got an 1 3/4 door, which is very common, this is not the hinge for you. You want the -6. If you have an 1 3/8 wood door, this is perfect. This is the one that you most likely want. The 5-inch happens to be a reference to the height of the barrel without the caps. Okay, we'll get to the dimensional properties of it in a moment. Door height, 6'8" doors, 7-foot doors, very typical. 2 hinges, 65-pound doors. If you've got a door that's about 90 pounds, you're going to want to go with 3 hinges. 2.8, 32-inch wide doors if you've got 2 hinges, and 36 if you're running with 3 hinges. And all that information is listed below this video. Now, the hinge leafs, looking at the rest of the description, are called non-template. That means these holes are in this staggered pattern that doesn't necessarily match any sort of standard. They are just where they are. Okay. And speaking of the holes, screws are included in a complementary finish. And that complementary finish is in the part number itself, and the 652 stands for satin chrome. So this is a steel base hinge with a satin chrome finish. Now, let's take a look at the template, which is a link below this video. And then we'll go into the installation instructions. So if you pull up the template, you're going to see in the upper left-hand corner the reference to the 1 1/8 to 1.5 thick door range requirement for this. You'll see a margin of 297 thousandths of an inch, which is a dimension a bit less critical in terms of manufacturing stuff at this point. And you'll also see a reference to 3/4 inch from the jamb to the center line of the pivoting axis of the hinge. Okay. Down below on the left-hand side, you'll see the remainder of all the dimensional properties of this hinge. So I won't go over all of those here, but just to show that that 5-inch comes in at the height of the hinge leaf. So it's really from here to here is the reference to 5-inch. Okay, so dimensionally, you can pull the rest of the data from there. Now, the important stuff that people really want to know is, how do I install this? How do I make this work? How do I calculate my door size, my frame size, and all that other stuff? So, the double-acting spring hinge, you're going to use it in either a single door or a pair of doors. You'll either have one door or you're going to have 2. Let's talk about banquet halls, too, by the way. You'll see these all the time. Let's talk about a single door opening. In the upper right-hand corner of the link to what's called the template, you're going to see a reference to frame opening, and that's the actual door width plus the A dimension. And the A dimension is taken from the table right below the drawing of the single and double door. The first decision that you have to make is, are you going to mortise the leaf to the edge of the door, or are you going to surface mount it? That will determine what the A dimension is. So, looking at that table, the A dimension refers only to single doors, so let's look at that column. if the door flange is not mortised, if you're going to take this portion, this is the door leaf. If this is going to be just surface mounted, you're going to make the A dimension 0.484 inch. For all intents and purposes, a half of an inch. So you'll take your frame opening, and the other two variables are the actual door size and then the A dimension. So now the question becomes, now that you know your A dimension, whether you're mortising it or you're not, it's either going to be about a half of an inch or about 7/16, the 0.393 if you're going to mortise it. You have to decide what information do you know regarding the opening. Is your frame already there? If it is, then you're going to measure the inside opening of the frame. You're going to deduct the A dimension, and that's the net door width. Or you might come at it from the reverse perspective. You might say, I've got a 36-inch door. It's actually 36 inch and it's full and square, and I'm going to make the frame around it. So you'll take 36, and you're going to add to it the A dimension, and that's your finished opening, whether you're mortising it or not. The mortise requirement on that is really drawn from the lower right-hand corner where you're seeing that reference to 5-inch overall height. Okay. The thickness of the leaf is pulled from the top view of the hinge where you're looking at it this way from the drawing, the 0.091 mortise depth. It'd be helpful to have that in a fractional size, but 0.091, just a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch, 3/32 is what that really is saying. So that's your mortise depth, and that is really the difference between the 0.484 and the 0.393 on the A dimension. So you can approach, what size everything is going to be, your frame and your net door width, based on what it is. If you don't have anything, well then start with whatever's easier. Sometimes it's, if you're manufacturing a frame, or if you have a stock frame that's already 36 inch, well then plane your door down, sort of situation. Okay, now moving on to a pair of doors. Same sort of logic. Which dimension do you know first? Do you have two doors that you've already got sized and you need to make the frame? Whatever the case is, let's say if you had two 36-inch doors and you were going to make the frame around it, well, you've got 72-inch. Plus, you weren't going to mortise either flange, so you'd add that B dimension of 0.968. So you're going to be basically 73-inch inside clear opening. Now that is based on having square edge doors. If you were to radius the door edges, you'd be able to achieve a tighter margin. So talking about radiusing over the edge of the doors, if you're doing a single door, you can achieve a tighter margin between the edge of the door and the what would be considered the lock side of the door, not the hinge side. If you radiused it over, you'd be able to get that down to 1/8 of an inch for sure. If you were to take a round over bit and round the door over, like the top row of tile in a bathroom that's bull-nosed, well, if you do that to the both sides of the door, it's radiused. So, looking at that single door dimension of about a half of an inch, and seeing the space, seeing what your mortise depth is, you'd be able to have a door width that would be, about 3/16 wider, if you were going to radius. If you're going to radius your doors over, feel free to reach out to us and we'll go into that in depth. I won't go into it here only because it's uncommon to do for double acting 3029 Bommer. Although, quite frankly, I think it makes for a nicer looking opening in terms of having a tighter margin. The only issue with that is that the margin on the lock side would then be tighter than the margin on the hinge side. That's probably the logic by which it's not called out specifically. So if there are any questions on sizing the frame, sizing the doors for this hinge, please feel free to reach out to us. At this point, I think we've beat that to the end. Let's move on to the installation instructions. The summary of this is if you have two hinges, you'll put one at the top, about 3 inch from the top. You want it as close to the top as realistically possible, and one at the bottom. Per the drawing, 3 inch from the top, 7 inch from the bottom. If you've got 3 hinges, and I'm a fan of having all 3 hinges on these doors, almost regardless of whether or not you feel that you need it. Sure, the hinges aren't inexpensive, but the truth of the matter is this. If you are on the borderline of the guidelines of where Bommer says to go to 3 hinges, certainly opt for 3 hinges, because as that door is opening and closed, there's a lot of force to the point where the door, if you're underpowered in the spring hinge, when the door is at a state of being closed, it will be plumb. But as you open the door and then the force of that door swinging out, the arc of its path becomes eccentric, or it actually, becomes technically wider at that point. And I've seen doors that are underpowered in terms of quantity of springs, and they will hit the jam. It's because there's so much tension, weight that is hanging on the entire assembly, that in a very small margin, it actually makes the hinge do this as it's swinging closed. To combat that, you'll take that 3rd hinge, and per the instructions, you're going to tuck it up right below that top hinge. Okay, and 2 of these spring hinges up at the top, unless your door is far heavier than it ought to be in the first place, is going to, remediate that sort of problem. Now, adjusting the tension on the doors, there is installation instructions that are going to be sorry, looking for it, are on page 2 of the link to the installation instructions. You're going to see all of this data that's here. And looking at that in the upper left-hand corner, you can see, we're going to talk about now how you actually set the tension on the hinge. The hinge, thankfully, is marked with a couple of arrows, although it's common and standard across the Bommer line. When you install the hinge, you install with this wheeled hole. It's called a tension collar. You install that pointed up. And when you install it in a pointed up fashion, you'll turn the tension collar in the direction of the arrow to set the tension. It happens to be clockwise. So as I do that, I reveal new additional holes in the tension collar, and it's into one of those newly revealed holes that I'll insert a tension pin. And you need 2 tension pins per hinge, because you have a tension collar here and here. Now, if you were to install the hinge with the tension collar down, no problem. You're just going to end up, you still turn it in the direction of the arrow. It just becomes counterclockwise. So installation instructions in the upper right-hand corner. Remove spring tension from each barrel by inserting the tension rod into the tension adjustment hole, rotate in direction of the arrow, and remove the tension pin. When these hinges ship from the factory, there's no tension set on the spring at all. If there is, turn that, the tension pin will be stuck in here. Turn that and just pop it out. Don't lose it. They're hard to replace. Locate hinges as shown in Figure 1. And Figure 1 is just simply a reference to the lower left-hand drawing that you see here. Single door, double door, it comes back the same way. Align the center line of the door with center line of frame and secure the frame leaf. So align the center line of the door, whatever the thickness of the door is, and the center line of the frame, make that the same, and then you're going to secure the frame leaf. So the door needs to center in the hinge needs to center in the jamb. Okay? And then you're going to attach this leaf to the frame. Actually, you'll approach it from this perspective. For best alignment of double doors, mount hinges on one door with the tension collars in the up direction, then, and with the tension collar down in the opposite, or on the opposite door. as also shown in Figure 1. It's drawn out there. So there's a reference to you might need shims. That's more of a reference to the installation, not a limitation of the hinge. You know, maybe the frame is ever so slightly out of plumb, that sort of situation. Now that you've got the hinges applied to the jamb, okay, you're going to place the door in the closed position, wedge door up from the floor until it is plumb. At this point, you'll need to have the door actually attached to the door leaf and screwed to it. It would be from the back side here. At that point, there's no tension on the hinge at all. You're going to get it carefully put in the opening, shim it from the bottom, make sure that it's square and plumb, okay? And then at that point, you'll insert your tension rod in the direction of the arrow on the barrel of the hinge and insert your tension pins. Do not exceed 5 holes of tension. That means as you're pulling this back, don't go past 5 additional holes, is what they're saying. The spring will be under too much torsion. You know, steps 1 through 4 are basically what we just said. Step 4, increase tension on the top hinges if door sags or return action is too slow. The top hinge is the one that's really doing the majority of the heavy lifting on this sort of an installation. At that point, once you know that you've got the tension set properly, you begin to carefully test your door operation. Be conservative. You don't want to get the door out to 90 degrees and have them both crash into each other until you know that the tension is proper on the top, on the springs that are set. And you'll of course do that, equally on both spring hinges. Really nice quality Bommer hinge, and like I said, this is the industry standard. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bommer logo. Right above it, it says "Made in USA." A fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I, to represent them. This represents the highest quality double-acting spring hinge that's available on the market, and it's also available in several different finishes as well. Your brasses, your oil rub bronzes. It's all based on steel, so you're not going to get a true plated architectural finish. However, it's a double-acting spring hinge, and the fact that it emulates the finish. The 603 zinc finish is very complementary to this and gives some corrosion resistance. I like to have a 603 in a restaurant application, thinking that there'll be, more humidity if it's a door on a kitchen. The possibility of it getting, constantly cleaned, et cetera, compared to a residential sort of application. Prime coat, if you're going to paint it, of course. Satin brass, polished brass, etc. All those kinds of things. And really all you do is take the part number and change the 652 into the 3-digit finish code. And if you have trouble finding that, please feel free to reach out to us. So, Bommer 3029-5-652 double-acting spring hinges. If you have any questions on this Bommer product or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.